Check 1, 2.
Check 3, 4.
Soren and Friends. I like that. Like the
I
sound of that.
knew. This is my favorite joke. I knew a German audio engineer. I knew a check 1, 2. You're welcome. Hi, everybody. We are going to talk about innovation and risk, how to encourage clients to take a leap of faith and then deliver. Let's start by getting to know who's on stage. Luca.
Hi,
Who
guys.
are you and what are you doing here?
Hi. My name is Luca De Laurentiis, and I'm an EP. I've been in this space, in this innovative space, since 2016. I started at Unit 9. I helped open up their North American office with Michelle Craig, and that was sort of the beginning and the forefront of a lot of what we call now sort of experiential and innovative work. So I spearheaded a lot of that work, did that for about 6 or 7 years, and then I was working at a company called VT Pro for the last 2.5 years. Also sort of working in the hardware and the robotic space as well. So happy to be here.
My name's Blair, and I'm a creative technologist working out in New York. Started in the space more in the sort of live visual space, and started working at a company called Fake Love in 2010, doing a lot of weird technology stuff for advertising and events, and a lot of like just unusual asks through that, and a lot of strange problem solving across like fully digital things to fully analog experiences, and just learned a lot of generalist stuff there. And right now I'm the VP of Creative Tech at Deep Local, which is a Pittsburgh-based experience design and creative technology company that does a lot of like fabrication, electrical engineering, software development, creative concepting, sort of like full service stuff, both in permanent and events-based work, but everything is sort of custom every time. So all this stuff is it's a lot of unique problem solving every time, and it's a lot of fun.
Excellent. I'm Soren West, and I've been practicing in live production for entertainment and brand communications for over 25 years. I've owned and operated several small businesses that all have serviced live event production from one angle or another. Today I have a production company that doesn't do any or does very little music and concerts, which is my origin, but does more B2B theater and brand activation. And I have another company called Sierra Whiskey Entertainment that invests in location-based immersive experiences. When people ask me what I do, sometimes my answer is that I don't really do anything. I just know all the people that do the things. And so I put the people together who can do things, and then things happen. And as it turns out, that is can be a full-time job. So I'm not a technologist, and I have such incredible respect and admiration for what you do, what so many here do, and it's a great honor to work with such incredible talent. And so I'm here really to learn to represent you well and to defend you well. Today we're going to explore a few questions. How do you say yes to a client before you know that what you're after is even possible? How do you support your team while you navigate the roller coaster of innovation? And lastly, have you ever taken a risk on a project and then find that it's all going pear-shaped? I'm guessing that we can all relate to these questions. So with that, we're going to dig into some case studies. And I'll just remind us as we do that I really like the ethos of no victory lap. This is not a sales event, and yet everything we do is very cool, and there are tremendous victories in the journey of what we do. So it's difficult to sometimes not come off as if we're doing a victory lap or selling, but the real essence of what we're after here is what happened behind the curtain. So we'll try to focus on that as we get into it. You want to take us out?
Sure. Great. Well, let's start with a project that I did when I was at VT Pro for Heineken. I like to, I think through hearing a lot of your guys' talks and being in the last 2 days, I can relate to the theme of, going into the unknown a little bit and sort of diving into the deep end in terms of, creating work that's first to market. And I think that's something that really invigorates me and I think a lot of our community, but also sort of scares us as well. So that's sort of the thin line I think that sort of we teeter between. And I like to bring up this project because this is, as you'll see, it's a very bespoke creative tech, but there's a lot of, I guess you can consider it non-traditional media, but it's revolving around a lot of traditional media. So I'll show how those two work together. So Heineken came to us. This was the release of their new, they were putting Heineken in bottles for the first time, or cans, excuse me, and they wanted to create a beer rover that would follow you wherever you went during the summertime. And we were pretty excited with the opportunity. They wanted to create a worldwide campaign using some AI capabilities and have it launched by summer, which was around 10-week turnaround. And of course, we said yes. And I think a lot of the times when you get presented a brief or a conceptual idea from a client or an agency that's really exciting and that's new and innovative, we tend to get really excited and sometimes jump the gun and say yes, and hope that hope that we can pull it off. And so I'll show you a little bit about the sort of the conceptual ideas of the ideation phase of where we started and where we ended up, just to give you an idea of how ideas progress. And so this is the first iteration of it. It was a beach cruiser, held about three 12-packs of Heineken bottles or cans and follow you all the way to the beach. Then there was a little droid that you can follow you around wherever you went on Venice Beach, and then my favorite one that we presented was the party bots, which is like a three-piece ensemble of we had the speaker, the grill, and the
Skee ball.
yeah, and the cooler. So we're like, we presented all these to client, and then we internally had to sort of rein it in. We're like, all right, we need to actually create something that's feasible within that time frame. So, tying this back to risk was really like we started big and we came together and we're like, okay, let's mitigate this risk. Let's figure out a way to actually pull this off and find some solutions that are more readily available to market, as opposed to creating something completely bespoke. So we went to market and we started working with this Lumu droid.
Was that totally budget driven, or was it the fact that you only had 10 weeks?
It was more timing. The budget was okay on this one, just because there were a lot of elements to it. But so we started working with this little guy here, which was a Segway essentially. So it had a lot of like the mechanics built in and the software built in. But those were some of the issues that we were having because we had to adhere this caboose, I guess, to it, filled with beers that would be able to follow you everywhere. So that's sort of where we started. And, in our shop, we started sort of understanding sort of the weight capacity to it. We built this custom rig. And keep in mind, we needed to create about 75 of these and also allow them to be shipped worldwide. So we had to deal with that as well. So, in terms of like production process, we really try to rein it in while keeping the ethos and the core of the idea, while like limiting and like mitigating this the risk as much as possible. And here it is in all its glory. This was the microsite where I lived in, where you can go, and the client decided to have a sweepstakes in order for us to disperse these around the country. And I'll show you the the little case study here. Sure, you could put a little bit of sound. This is all done in camera. We're departing from pixels here. This is all hardware here. And yeah, this is what I tell my wife I do for a living, is create custom droid bots that follow you with beer. So, feeling really privileged to be a part of something like this, where it like really allows you to play with like custom technology and really like bake it into really nice narrative. So this was like the teaser.
Hello. Feeling thirsty?
It asked if somebody was thirsty. It had a little script that we wrote, but this was the little teaser that essentially launched the campaign. And the campaign was, we were able to ship these to 75 countries. This was the countdown for the sweepstakes, and shipped it to influencers, and it was important that it was accessible to sort of to somebody that never worked with Illuma before. So we created a custom app that essentially was pretty plug and play, that allowed you to sort of control it as well. And I really like this because it sort of spawned across a lot of different media outlets that Heineken and channels that Heineken wouldn't usually sort of be featured in. So like sci-fi and hypebeast and stuff like that. So it came out as like a really interesting piece of tech. And it was on Tinder, of course, for those thirsty folks. And I'll leave you with this: it made a cameo with Max Verstappen in the Netherlands for the Heineken Zero campaign.
Box.
Have no fear. I'm full of beer.
So that's the Heineken bot, and yeah, I like to show this just because it really gives you an idea of like how much you can leverage custom and creative tech while sort of limiting and keeping some of that risk sort of subdued by keeping the client really close to the process. And
So they came to you with the idea,
yeah,
and no time.
yeah. For the first phase, yeah, there wasn't any time, and that sort of, I guess, I think the parameters of time helped even like limit the risk even more. When usually it's the opposite. I think this sort of helped us sort of channel in our thinking and our limitations, as opposed to sort of trying to create something completely bespoke.
How did you tell us about the conversation with the client when you're preparing to say yes, or you've already said yes? I actually think the challenge for most of us is how to say no to anything.
Yeah.
But as you're saying yes, how did you, or to what degree did you communicate that we don't know how to do this yet, and we're going to have to invent it, and we're going to be on a ride?
I think it's very subtly. I try to, when we go into production for such unique elements like this, I try to either create a safeguard where it's either a phased approach or a prototype approach. So if there are some sort of fail points, they're sort of flagged along the way. So I think I try to be very clear and concise with the client, but also a little vague, because it's like ultimately you don't really know what sort of the hurdles are until you approach them.
Was there a point at which it felt like it was going pear-shaped, or the clock was ticking and you didn't have the answer?
I think we did a really good job, us at VT Pro, to create this custom tech. I think we had some issues like with sort of the weight distribution of it, being able to actually be really agile and being able to follow you wherever you went. But there was never really like a moment where it felt like it was all going pear shaped. I think we logistically it was tough because we had to ship these around the country, but fortunately with this one, I think you know like any production you go into, you really try to set sort of a stable bedrock and a plan. I think that we did a really good job at doing that, which allowed us to succeed in the end.
That's great. I remember the campaign got a lot of attention, so it seemed like a big success. Was it financially successful?
Yeah, it was great because there were two phases. One phase was the initial 40, and then another phase was the initial the following 20 30. So after we sort of had an understanding how to do the first 10, because we use off the shelf software and hardware, we were able to scale it up pretty quickly.
Great. Excellent story. Thanks.
Thanks.
Blair.
Right. So I'm going to go back in time to, I think it was 2014 I did this project. I'll play the video while I'm talking over it. It's a project for Lexus. It was a similar case where like this is too cool of an opportunity to pass up, even though the timeline is crazy. It's like we want to make a life-size video game using an F1 driver uh, and basically like invite people to this event, sit them in a car with Jan Artuli, and give them an iPad and let them like draw a shape on the iPad, and then basically have them play a game to like hit all the checkpoints as fast as they can, with Yarna sort of following the path that they're drawing, and it's all real. There's a couple shots in the commercial that are comped, like the text on the walls, but like this stuff's all real. um, and it was I think we got the brief in early June. We were on set in mid July, so we had about 6 weeks to like figure out how are we where are we shooting this, how many projectors do we need, how many so there's a number of like risk factors for like hardware, and how does the game work, and how are we tracking the car in the space. And that's sort of where I'll get into the like where things went pear shaped on mine is the car tracking. um,
Wait, so the client comes to you with this idea in
Mhm.
6 weeks,
yeah
and you say, "Yeah, sure."
yeah it sounds great. I think we love video games. We could do something like that. um, and I think it was still fairly early career for me, so it was like
Ah,
being a little brash about like, yeah, I think I can do that.
ignorance is such a wonderful tool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, we had a lot of game enthusiasts, so we couldn't say no. um, but yeah, there's just a lot of it's just some like behind the scenes shots. But the car tracking was the thing that went sideways for us, because the whole game relies on being able to know where the car is in this, I think it was like 100 foot by 200 foot space, and it's moving at like, it probably got up to like 40 miles an hour in that space. And I did a lot of research, a lot of tests. It was like, oh, do we use GPS? Do we use LiDAR? Too expensive, doesn't really work fast enough for this purpose. We could have an array of cameras in the ceiling. It's going to be really hard to test at scale, have it be fast enough. 2014, this kind of tracking stuff wasn't in super great shape. So we ended up going with this specialized camera. It was just an infrared camera with a really wide fisheye lens. We did the math of like, all right, if this is 40 feet in the air, we think we can see this whole thing with a single thing. Also, it being a car commercial, you can only do so much to the car itself because it needs to look exactly like the car does. You can't put a bunch of crazy stuff on the outside and still hope that it works. So one of our tests was like, all right, we think this is going to work. We'll go to a warehouse in New York, put a camera like 15 feet in the air, and put an infrared light on a remote control car, and we'll see if that works. And it did work. But what I think where I failed to notice it would go wrong is like in that small scale with a fisheye lens, one line is straight when the car moves, but when you bring that fisheye curved lens another like 30 feet in the air, that straight line becomes a curved line. And that was not something that I had built into the software to correct for, and not something that I was going to solve like, I think it was about 24 hours before the shoot when we had like 80 people coming on set to, I think we had like 4 days of just like projector setup and everything. So it was like 24 hours, there's going to be 80 people here filming this commercial, and it's not working yet. What are we going to do?
And your client's with you.
They're there. It's a very small, like room in this, like, I think we were on an Italian military base in like an airplane hangar, and there's not a lot of places to just hang out. So they're like in there with us and kind of breathing down our back of like, is this going to work? Is this going to, what are we going to do tomorrow? There were things that got like cut and changed, but the way we got around it was, working with my team of like, all right, we can either fix this curved thing, which I don't think we can do quickly enough. If we had like 3 more days, we could probably figure it out. But the next best solution was the Wizard of Oz solution, where quickly make a new piece of software that lets me manually override the tracking, and I'll go up in the ceiling of the airplane hangar with this sort of remote control thing, put a little spotlight on the car that the camera can't see, and then manually follow the car moving around the track as my basically my mouse cursor, and then just sat up there all day during the like 10-hour shoot, just while we did like probably 50 run-throughs of people doing different races. But it almost wouldn't have worked. I think the game would have had to be very different if we, or it would have just been totally faked. But
So in the final 24 hours prior to everybody showing up and cameras rolling,
yeah,
you had to punt and completely reinvent the way this was going to go down.
yeah, and had to get everyone on board, understanding what the problem was, how we could solve it, what the most likely choice was, while also like at the tail end of a long production where there's already been a lot of like other stressful adjustments and things like that. I think the saving grace is like it was a real event; those were real reactions from people, but it was for commercial, so we could fake like some elements of it. But I don't know. I watched. It all happened. It was real. It's just some stuff was a little fibbed. And
In the end, a victory.
yeah, definitely.
I find that in those moments of crises, um, there's often part of the tension. Part of the tension, obviously, is that shit ain't going to plan. But then another part of the tension is the communications of we're in a crisis. We need to solve a complex problem, and we're under a tremendous time constraint. And I find like the talking about it, the communicating it to the stakeholders, particularly the clients who um, might not be happy at this juncture and are hemorrhaging cash and have trusted in you, and now they're wondering why they did that. And
Right.
you have to communicate the truth of where you are and what your plan is. And at the same time, you have to be consulting with your team to come up with the answer. And you kind of need a protected cone of silence to do that. You can't succeed with somebody breathing down your neck. So, can you tell us about that tension or how your team was set up to succeed in that situation? Or how did it go with the client? How did it go with your team?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different layers. There was, the end client, there was the agency representing them, there was like sort of the film production company, there was us doing the sort of technology solutions, and I think there was even a layer of like the AV aspects to it. So I think it was a lot of like working with the internal team to like, yeah, just describe that problem first, and then working with like, it was really just 2 technologists and a creative director and a producer there from our side. So trying to explain to our creative director and the producer, like, here's the problem. We think we've got a solution. I think we had only gotten enough of the system up like 12 hours prior to even know that it was a problem. So no one knew that this was coming, and it wasn't necessarily planned for. So it's not like the client was waiting for us to like do a bunch of demos and see it beforehand. They were like, we'll just see it when we film the commercial. And I don't even know if we had it like fully working until like shoot day. Um,
Did you have any backups? Like, do you have any alternative fallbacks?
I think it would have just been like probably faking the way that the checkpoints were hit. We'd just like be like, okay, he hit that one, and we'll just like hit next on the on the next one to appear or something like that. But I'm trying to think of.
Because it's really easy to, when you get an idea like this, it's, the fact that you guys did it practically is a feat of its own,
Right.
And it's easy to fall into the, that movie magic sort of representation of it, which I think we see happen a lot with these ideas.
Right. Yeah, because even in the commercial, there's a lot of like fake shots. They could have faked the whole thing if they wanted to, but the story was in that real reaction and the fact that it did happen for real. But yeah, it's I don't remember it. It was there was definitely some long nights. I don't know that it was like a high tension. Like there's not yelling in the room. It was just like we all have to calmly figure this out right now.
It's good
And
when
it's like
there's not yelling.
yeah, that's not productive. Like we can sit here and be mad all day, but we have to
And in the
solve the
end,
problem.
would you say you left with greater trust, or was that a call you never got again?
That's a good question. It's been so long. I mean, I think the trust was there. It's I do remember getting other asks for similar things for quite a while from I think from that client and other folks. So and it ended up being a successful campaign for them in the end. So they got what they wanted, and it's just some parts weren't there, but I think they still got that tracking being real or not wouldn't have necessarily affected the outcome. And I think that's like what I tend to lean towards, especially as an engineer. I want to solve the real thing, but remembering that it's theater sometimes, whether it's a commercial or a live event, like there are aspects that are more important than others, and it's not always that solving the engineering problem. Everyone has their perspective of what needs to be solved.
Good story. I have a story of where we said yes, and in the end, it was a victory, but it did go pear-shaped. Alex, I think you were there. Were you there for this one? Unleash Speed? No. Moynihan Station, 2014. It was this was a Nike activation for the Super Bowl when the Super Bowl was in New York, and there were multiple aspects to this event that ran for, I think, 8 days or something. It was a long stretch, and one of them was this 40-yard dash track. And so we set up a 40-yard dash, which is for people who know about sports. I do not. Is a standard thing in the NFL. And we set up a long LED screen that says Unleash Speed in this picture. In the foreground, bottom left, you see what was a high-speed camera track. And the object of what we sold was that, here, let's advance one. A couple other shots here. What we sold was that consumers would enter at or participants would enter at one end of the track. They would use an RFID bracelet to say, hey, I'm Soren West and I'm on the track right now. And then they would do the 40-yard dash twice. And each time they did it, it triggered an automated 5-camera shoot of their dash. And the shadow running on the LED screen was the record holder in the NFL. So you're trying to beat that shadow. Let's advance. This was, this has some audio to it, but. So this is a 1:1 aspect ratio video. And it's got this branded top and tails to it. So 2014, Instagram was 3.5 years old, I think, and had just recently expanded to include video. And you were able to put a 15-second 1:1 video up, and that was it. And so what we sold was the notion that we were going to have this process and be able to deliver to the participant within minutes their personalized, branded 15-second one-by-one video that showed them doing the unleashed speed 40-yard dash. Within hours of opening, we realized that our system had many flaws, and that what was going on behind the curtain was barely automated and was just pretty much a panic. It was a total panic. We had folders and folders full of the content from each of the 5 cameras. We had our audio tracks, our top and tails graphics that we had to put in it, and we just quickly realized that the automation that we imagined or that we had sold was not happening. And so this is like hours into an 8-day activation. And so we ended up hiring, I think, 16 editors to go sit backstage. And I see, Alex, that you're quite relieved you were not with us on this one. Yeah, you were not there. Okay. Laura Frank was with us. Lauren Brignoni was with us. We had a really great team. And so, here toward the end of the day, with these folders full of content and very few participants having received what the client expected them to see. So we're also tracking the social media impact, right? And so we're being expected, the client's expecting to see these spikes in activity, and it's not happening. So we had to be in pretty constant communication with them about how this was not going to plan, and what is our solution, and we had to come up with a solution. And 16 people backstage that weren't in the budget that are now going to sit there for the next 5 or 6 days on the budget is not trivial. In the end, while the 16 people were editing with the other 4 that we already had, our core team was redesigning the automation, and by the end of the week, we actually had it down. But it was challenging.
How long did you have for planning for this one?
Oh, it was Nike. So we had 9 minutes and 17 seconds.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
And what did clients say when 16 editors all of a sudden were on site? Was that we're like, oh, we have a contingency in place, or
Well,
what was that conversation like?
no, I actually prepared them for that. I said, like, this isn't going well. We're going to have to punt. And the most immediate sort of fail-safe response is to throw money at it and throw people at it and go, make it a simple manual solution.
And mitigating that risk, did you have that workflow already sort of dialed in? Like, did these editors sort of understand what they were doing on the day, or was that something that you had to?
No, that was like super fast on site in real time training.
So it was an issue that you couldn't foresee at all within this experience.
Well, in retrospect, one can always say perhaps I should have foreseen that, but no, we didn't.
Yeah.
We didn't. We had been working with the client for several years at that point, and so we did have their trust, and they knew that we weren't messing about, or that it wasn't. They never. At that time, I felt very lucky that they didn't view it as incompetency, but rather viewed the rapid solving of the problem as real partnership. But we were sweating.
Yeah, I think it's really important to sort of, have the client express a lot of sort of educational notions to them, because it's the metric of success when you're doing a project like this. Like, I'm seeing this for the first time, and to me it looks successful, but if you're a client on hand and you see 16 people show up, and all of a sudden it feels like you've missed the mark. And I think that, like, working in this space in particular, I think that that's something, an initial conversation that's always important to understand and to educate the client on.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think that one of the most important things is it's the client's project, right? Right. I'm a tiny little production company making tiny amounts of money compared to the multinational multi-billion-dollar cap company that hired us to do it. So, and this is a point that I think is really important for all of us, is that yes, I'm going to take on the risk. You're going to take on the risk when you say yes. But pointing to that moment and saying, hey, dear client, I'm going to say yes to this. And in saying yes, I'm going to join you in the risk. But to be clear, it's your risk, right? I'm your partner, and your best solution to embracing this risk. And the reason we're doing it is because we believe collectively that the innovative outcome is worth it. And we believe, as your partner, that we have what it takes to go on this journey and find the answer and get to the end in a victorious way. And I think it's so important to point that out, because in the case of Nike, and this didn't remain true forever, but Blair, you and I did a Nike project today,
right.
sort of in the heyday of their spending on consumer activation.
Right.
And we were able to charge an appropriate amount of money to pay for the R&D
Buffer that risk.
and to buffer that risk.
Yeah.
And so in the end, we ended up splitting the cost of the 16 people, but my half of it was generally accounted for in the fact that we were charging a sufficient amount of money to figure something out that we didn't know how to do.
Right. Can you, yeah, I think having that, like, that buffer of, like, I think any of these bespoke projects where it's like you just don't know, you know how to charge for about like 60% of it, and then there's like 40 where I'm like, I don't even know what I'm buying yet necessarily, especially with those fast turnarounds. It's just there's not, you have to throw a little bit of extra money at it because that's like the lever that you have. And I think even at a certain point, throwing too many people at it like doesn't. I've had that come up too, where it's like, oh, can we just we're coming up a week short on this deadline. Can we throw more people at it? My favorite line to throw at clients is like, 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month. If we
I
try
love
to
that one.
if we try to throw too many people at it, it's actually going to make it go slower than if we just like kind of keep going forward and find more creative solutions.
I think Laura Frank taught me the 9 women one.
It's really good.
It's very handy. I just really want to emphasize this again, because you know, you look at the work that you guys have done. You look at VT Pro as an incredible example of delivering quality, and that the ability to say yes to something without having the answer. You know, part of it's chutzpah, part of it's just sort of the terminal condition that most of us were born with. But it's also the result of you're able to say that because you've been practicing for years, and whether you own it or you have a relationship with, you have the resources, right? You have people that you know and trust who are practicing. You have products on a shelf. You have um, the cables to plug in to the right black boxes that will eventually get to the answer. And those things didn't show up the minute your client called. Those came from years and years of practice and R&D. And so to that point, Blair, where you say, you know, I know how to price this portion of the job, but I don't know how to price the rest of that. I generally feel strongly that the answer is more, that we should be charging um, substantially for that portion that we can't quite see. Because again, I'm your partner in the risk, but to be clear, it's your risk.
Right.
And I'm prepared for it, so that's worth a lot.
Yeah, I think, and I think part of what you were saying too is like uh, that team and that communication element. I feel like I've heard it come up a lot in uh, these last 2 days here, and I think looking back on some of my older risks, it's like it felt like a lot just on me, but I think understanding, I think as I've grown through the career, it's like, all right, this is all a team risk. There's parts of this that I need to take on, but I need to make sure that the team is clued in and that we're all feeling good about how we're gonna approach this thing together and not feel like it's just a burden on one person, but it's like it's a group effort. Um,
Yeah, I agree, and I think that like ultimately, like to button this up, I think like risk is why we're doing this, because I think that's what allows us to create something that's sort of first to market and something completely unique that none of us really know what the finish line looks like. And I think that like when you have a great team behind you and some creative minds all along for the ride, mitigating that risk with you and allowing that risk to propel you to do something really interesting. I think that's what sort of leads this sort of innovative space.
Great. That's our pitch.
Thanks so much, everyone. All right, thank you all. We have time for a couple questions, 5 minutes or so of questions, and maybe Michelle can get it started.
Hello.
Hey, Shelly.
I'm curious about how you go about building those teams sort of in general, and the companies that you guys have been in, what's the size number of people that you have, and then how do you expand those teams for, doing the actual project, and are you consistent in going back to the same partners, or I guess it's sort of twofold, and have you ever not been able to do that and had a outcome that was surprising from, you know what I mean? Not going through it
By
the way
not
you
getting your the A squad or the one that you know.
I'll just quickly. I think being in this space, it's you wanna allow yourself to be flexible, because ultimately you're gonna get ideas and briefs from agencies and clients that are gonna be very bespoke. So it's like, hey, if they want to do something really unique with like a glass blower or something, you need to be able to like have the resources to like ping those people that are all going to be sort of in your freelance network. So I think it's like building a core freelance network, and then having like I've always been a part of like really amazing creative teams that can sort of speak on production and ideate really well, so that when you go into production, you're actually able to execute the work.
I'd say I generally have like 3 core teams that are either employed by me. Historically, we used to have lots of employees, but 140 at one point. But now, post COVID, we're in the teens. So we're much leaner and bring people on. But probably have 3 core teams that enable us to do multiple projects at a time. But then I have the A list that I call, if it's like a multi-camera live shoot. I have the A list for the brand activation that's high touch and people are up close to it. And I have another team for B2B if there's a like heavy creative with brand communications. But then I think part of we don't want to get caught in a rut either. You're always trying to expand your world, and part of what's been great about being here is meeting new people that now I want to bring them in. So I think incremental changes in team composition is important too. Not like don't replace the whole thing at all at once. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
I think for me, it's like finding like talent, but like humble talent, because there's just like everyone's gonna make a mistake along the way, and like finding a team that feels comfortable taking those risks and making mistakes, and knowing that tomorrow it might be your mistake, the next day it might be mine, and being able to just like work through the problem together instead of it being an ego based like, oh, I need to solve it my way because that's the only way to be solved, is not the way that we're all going to get through it. Because
That's an interesting approach. We like to have divas that
yeah,
are like highly egotistical, throw fits, and never make mistakes.
exactly.
That's one approach.
Question?
You talked a lot about the innovation and risk, and I think there's a lot of clients that want to be innovative, but aren't necessarily willing to take the risk, let alone pay extra for it. And I heard the word trust brought up a lot, and wondering if there's something from your side that you do, one, to identify those clients that say they want to be innovative and are willing to take that risk and are willing to give you the trust that you need to take that risk.
That's a mean question. I think there is so much diplomacy required in our sales efforts and in our client communications. And, you know, to paraphrase, well, which is it, you dumbass? Like, do you want to innovate and embrace risk, or do you want to, or do you want it to, you want to know that it's going to cost $12.85 and not a penny more? Because those things don't really exist in the same space. So finding a, I would work on my script a little bit. I would change, I would soften it. But yeah, I feel like that educational process with clients to bring them in as partners, they don't practice what we practice, right? And they typically don't. They're, I think generally speaking, we are accustomed to a much greater deal of risk than they are. And they chose to work under the umbrella of a generally a large corporation, right? And we chose to work in a small firm of creatives that embrace risk. And so bringing them respectfully and but firmly into our world and our process and saying, this is what it's going to be like. It's going to be wild, and we don't know how much it's going to cost. And I think really getting to a place where they own the decision. Unfortunately, I think a lot of clients grow up in a school of thought where they don't have to own the decision. They're the client. They're going to tell you how it is, and you have to eat it. I encourage us all to resist that.
Yeah, that's really good. I think, what was I going to say? I feel like some clients are like, they can be needier than others for like wanting proof that this risk will be mitigated. And then there's some that don't seem to like think about it at all until it's like the day of the event or something like that. And it's just finding like, especially when it's a new client, it's feeling out through presentations of like, how much do you want to see under the hood and how much do you want to just see the polished product at the end? And like, some of them are very curious and some of them aren't at all, or there do need to be times when you have to pull the car over and be like, all right, here's the act. If you want to have that change and you want to understand why it costs so much to change this thing, then let's talk about it. Let's walk you through that process. And sometimes they're still like, yeah, but I still want it. And sometimes you just have to make it work. But yeah.
Yeah, just to button that up. I mean, I think sometimes we're granted with the pre-proposal process where you have time to pitch your ideas and I think that's the time you can really start picking up on the minutia of like what client is saying and what some of their watchouts are, so you can sort of start basing your production pipeline and how you go about working with them throughout that process, because some clients want to be really dialed in and have a very sort of clear pathway of how we're getting there, and some clients want to be a bit more be shepherded to the finish line. So
The white glove
Yeah,
service.
yeah.
I think we have time for one more quick question from Marcus.
Check, check.
It should be on.
Check. There we go. First, a quick comment. I really love the 9 women can't make a baby in a month analogy, and it reminds me of a book I read when I studied computer science. It's called The Mythical Man Month, which kind of states that if you have a project that is late and you throw more people at it, the project will become later. But that's just a comment. I'm wondering, how do you communicate risk? How do you visualize risk to the client? And how do you still generate buy-in, but at the same time limit your liability?
I mean, that's the fine line sometimes, because it's like as a company, you want to win the business, and you want to win the work, and you want to like show enthusiasm towards the idea and show that you can pull this off, but at the same time, be sort of a little bit, be honest about the risk as well. And so each client is different. Everybody has different personalities, obviously, and I think it's sort of our job to sort of listen to the moment a little bit, and be able to capitalize on it through those conversations.
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely a lot of just like reading that like emotional level that you get back from the client from each presentation of like how anxious they might feel about certain things, and sometimes you might want to just get out with it and just be like, here's all the things that you might be worried about, and here's why we're not so worried about, or here are our backup plans. And sometimes you might sense that they're just totally fine with, or they feel comfortable with how you're approaching everything, and they know that you're doing that in the background, and you don't always need to show the risk mitigation like documentation that you might have internally. That's a whole different discussion of like internally you probably should have that. You don't always have to show it to them, but yeah.
It's art, not science, right? I mean, there's no clear answer to your question, right? Because it's the human part. It's not the ones and zeros part. And to that end, in hiring people or assigning positions to people that have to intuitively figure out the answer to your question, I've always tried to put people with a really great signs of innate emotional intelligence in those positions, because those are the people that can sort of feel their way and read the room with the client and sort of decide how many cards to show as it relates to risk, or sort of play that dance in negotiating setting the bedrock for our relationship through this adventure together. I think that takes a great deal of emotional intelligence, and that's a natural gift that usually doesn't come with the gifts required to deliver on it, right? So this is why collaboration in our firms and in our teams is so critical, because we need a pretty broad spectrum of natural gifts in order to get from here to there. And I think one of the great joys of our work is sharing those different gifts with one another in a collaborative way.
Awesome. Well, that's it for our time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll be back at 3:05 with the next panel, so you have a quick little 10-minute turnaround, and we'll be back in here. Thanks.